Let me underline that academies always have interacted with society. Don't look at them as isolated bodies which are focused just on science. Many of our academicians' colleagues, also those in the working group that prepared this report, are engaging in society, have elected positions in civil society organizations, and so on. So I start with this little message. Academicians have their feet on the ground and find it increasingly important in times of troubling relationships between science and society and trust in science, that dialogue with policy and broader civil society communities are more important than ever. Without further ado, I want to briefly introduce the content of the report. As Volker Termoyen already underlined, this is part of a larger science priority setting and science assessment project on food, nutrition, security, and agriculture. EASAC has a history in engaging in these topics. What is really new with this report is the framing. The framing as a food systems, taking a food systems approach. That calls for attention to interdisciplinarity and for attention to complexity. The second issue, which is new, is that this report focuses a lot on opportunities and challenges for science due to the mega trends of digitization, the innovations in biology, the increasingly better understanding of human behavior, and the threats to our environment and climate change. The report aims to reach at a consensus. However, as you know, scientists do not come easily to consensuses. It's a key element of this report which distinguishes itself from this or that study of a think tank, which we all are exposed to a lot, by being peer-reviewed, independently, anonymously peer-reviewed. This characteristic of the report, I think, must be underlined. In the end, this report was endorsed by the EASAC member academies. So lots of critical minds have looked over this document. The conclusions were, of course, also discussed in the various regional networks. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's important to underline these special features. I would like to underline one aspect of this report, which I will not talk about in my summary presentation. I think this report is very fair to the many science initiatives and reports and projects and processes which have been and are ongoing in Europe. This initiative and this project and the colleagues working on it know very well that we are standing on the shoulders of others, other scientists, other policy initiatives. So there's a whole chapter on that, and let me just leave it with that. As I said, we focus on a food systems approach, understanding the supply and demand side, production, human behavior, the linkages to health, efficiency, and the criteria of safety, availability, accessibility of food. So that's the framework, broadly speaking. It would take too much time to walk you through all the boxes and arrows in this simple graph of a food system. I will mainly focus on the system as a whole in the first few minutes now, and then on the block of health and nutrition on the left-hand side, and on agriculture on the right-hand side, and the interactions. On food systems, the report underlines that agricultural productivity, and especially the issues of sustainability of productivity, minimizing pressure on natural resources, especially soils and water, remains a key issue for science attention. Transformation towards a circular economy and bioeconomy, understood as a systems change, is emphasized in the food systems chapter of the report. Part of the systems approach also relates to how food relates to health. Food contamination, food safety, food origin, tracing, traceability of goods and services related to food are a key aspect which we underline, where we see opportunities with new scientific methods in both in biology and in digitization. Taking account of cross-cutting issues, this report emphasizes a lot the threats from climate change and the need to respond to it. Part of the systems perspective is also our call to invest in better understanding markets and their volatilities in the increasingly globalized food system. So better understanding of extreme events, investing in resilience, and in the role of a rule-based fair trade system. That research needs to be revisited, probably even more so because of the rule-based trade system becoming under scrutiny and, if not threat, because of protectionist tendencies which will impact farmers and consumers if it actually happens as we need to fear. Let me briefly move inside this framework on health and nutrition, which we, in the study group, which is composed of experts, not only, by the way, from the European Union, but including colleagues from Russia and from Norway and so on. We felt we should put nutrition and food security up front rather than coming from a production-driven value chain. And you should not be surprised that these chapters are the longest and probably the most innovative in the report. We anchor this work in the Sustainable Development Goals, who cannot be translated into action unless there is heavy investment in science and innovation. The SDGs, and not only the so-called SDG number 2, World Without Hunger and with Sustainable Agriculture, but several of the Sustainable Development Goals relate to the agenda which we have placed before you. Agriculture innovation, food system efficiency, nutrition and public health, competition for land, and food and nutrition security and agriculture in relation to the environment relate to at least 8 or 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals directly and indirectly, practically to all of them. If we don't get this science agenda right, the Sustainable Development Goals will not be achievable. By the way, if you search for science or research in the Agenda 23, you will find maybe 6 or 7 mentionings. Science and research have not played a key role in the SDGs. By the way, that was different in the Agenda 21, the Rio Agenda of 1992 and its update. So we have a role to play as a science community to make sure that the SDGs are efficiently and effectively pursued. On nutrition, food choices, and public health, the report emphasizes the great opportunity of new data systems, including big data. The opportunities to better understand consumer behavior. If we don't do that, invest in that science, we will fail to address the obesity problems, which are increasingly rampant in Europe. Personalized nutrition, very much emphasized in Food 2030 at this event last year here in Brussels, is part of that. But we need to come to grips with what is really a sustainable and healthy diet. That's a complex question. Sounds simple. It's a very complex question. We need to track the externalities, the indirect effects, and be clear in order to give guidance to policy making. Sustainable in terms of environmental footprint, CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Sustainable in terms of human health. The report extensively discusses the problem of excessive meat consumptions in parts of Europe and parts of European populations. Let me shift to the block on agriculture and its linkages with income and employment briefly. The report and our team calls for a comprehensive ecological approach in dealing with agriculture innovations, including aquatics. The role of innovation in plant breeding, in genomics, in livestock, livestock health are centerpieces of the innovation agenda in Europe and beyond, and where Europe has a lot to share. The report also emphasizes oceans and marine resources, both from a cleaning up and environmental pollution perspective, and from a use perspective in order to reduce pressures on land and natural resource management. We are concerned about the land use in Europe and the sustainability of land use and soil management. That issue has been identified before and by others, but this is a theme which we have very clearly outlined, not just to emphasize land and soil, but from a nexus perspective of food, water, and other ecosystem services. The value of ecosystem services has been not appreciated enough in policy, including by the Common Agricultural Policy. We call for a fresh emphasis on that. This is also where issues of the bioeconomy, relevant for many sectors, comes in as the transformative strategy in which food and agriculture and nutrition innovations should feel embedded, being part of it. Let me conclude with 2 slides. The strategic dimensions from this analysis includes a critical interface to be paid attention to on nutrition sensitivity of food systems and on environmental sustainability. The traditional approach, here we do some nutrition research and do labeling of this or that food and nutrition education. And there we work with farmers and rural communities in order to get the most out of a productive agricultural sector, is an outdated perspective. It belongs together. A nutrition, a healthy diet needs to be produced, traded, stored, nurtured, informed about, checked for quality, transparently for consumers, and the private sector has a role to play in that. So that is a key message. Secondly, Europe knows far too little about the nutrition situation of its vulnerable groups. Actually, we know less about the nutrition situation of low-income and vulnerable groups in Europe than is known in the United States. So we need to invest in these monitoring and databases in order to have targeted policy actions. Vulnerable groups, children, women, low-income groups, migrants, marginalized communities. The report has ample reference on that fact. We need to know more, otherwise policy cannot act and civil society cannot engage. And we emphasize that a CAP reform should, in the future, should rebalance priorities from income subsidies to innovation and sustainability. The innovation agenda must continue to emphasize the key role of basic science as the source of innovation. And we, of course, that's what you can expect from an academic consortium, emphasize evidence-based research. The European academies emphasize that science and innovation investment in Europe cannot be done in isolation. It needs to be shared. We need interregional cooperation. We need to be concerned about the spillover effects of food and agriculture and nutrition policy and human behavior in Europe into other regions. Lastly, here is a summing up of 8 highlights from the EASAC report. We emphasize diet and health, agriculture and climate, both agriculture's contribution to and agriculture's suffering from climate change, and greenhouse gas emissions, including far beyond CO2, the health effects of NOxes and so on. We emphasize marine resources and aquaculture, again, doing good, utilizing but also preventing further pollutions and coming back to clean resource management. We emphasize food safety. We advocate a science-based approach to the reform of the common agricultural policy with a focus on innovation, sustainability, and public goods. We emphasize a systems context for the transformation of the European economies in terms of bioeconomy, circular economy, of which food and agriculture is the key component. We underline basic science and research, and we advocate connecting scientific evidence base to policy, which was the statement with which I started this brief presentation. Thank you for your attention.